Hello, you guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Take 30 podcast. So, my guest today is Jimmy. So, Jimmy, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, Erica. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show. Um, I just want to start with like a question that's basically it's just very light. What's something challenging that's happened in the last few weeks, or what's something that you've learned in the last few weeks? And it can be anything: a book you read, an article that you read, or even something you saw on TV.
Something that's challenging the last few weeks. I think one thing really more internally for myself is the importance of staying positive in the sense of not just like not this delusional positivity, but really looking for the good in what's going on and really looking for reasons to be grateful.
Hmm.
And that's a deliberate act. And to celebrate the wins, no matter how small. I had a very small win this. Well, I thought it was a small win earlier this year, and I told my team, I said, "Listen, that we're not even going to count that as a win. Let's say I made a sale and it was like $1,
Hmm.
and we're not going to count that as a. Well, it wasn't $1, but we're not going to count that as a win." And I realized that no, it is still $1. It's still money that came in, and it's still a result of the work of my team. And
Hmm.
so we do need to celebrate that because it was a gift from God, from the universe.
Hmm.
And it's important for me that to celebrate the wins, no matter how small in quotes I think they are, because they really aren't any small wins. They're all wins. They all move us in the right direction, and they're all important. So
Absolutely.
that was a big thing for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to tell myself all the time, like, small wins are good too. Um, so like I have this saying, that like no matter how little progress it is, it's still progress, right? So it's even though it might be a small win for me, it's one step closer to getting to that big goal that I have. And so like that is something that I tell myself, like, celebrate the small wins. Just because, like, it might not be as big, um it's still a win. So like I think it's so important that we appreciate those small progress because it's getting towards our ultimate goal. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So Jimmy, tell us just a little bit about yourself, where you grew up and where you went to school and stuff like that.
Sure. So about me. So I grew up in three countries. I grew up in Nigeria, I grew up in England, and I grew up in the United States. And I basically went to school in all three countries. I started my education in Nebraska, and I guess I ended the first wave of my education, which would be my first degree, also in Nebraska,
Mm-hmm.
with some England and Nigeria peppered within. I had two degrees in business, a first degree and a master's in business.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of a bit about myself, I worked for over 20 years in operations management and management consulting, and eventually I transitioned into producing a documentary and becoming a storyteller and public speaker on issues around workplace trauma, and also just finding happiness in and around the work that we do.
Yeah, that is amazing. So tell us just little bit about, because I was listening to your TED talk on YouTube, and I do follow a lot of TED talks actually, and you talk specifically about your experience with workplace trauma. So can you tell us just a little bit about your own experience with that?
So, without repeating the TED talk,
Hmm.
the analogy I give in the TED talk around going to work in a cage with a wild leopard, and the dangers involved in going back to work every day in a leopard's cage. My experience, I think the biggest thing I would say about my career, two things actually, two big things. One, I loved being a management consultant. It is a job that I truly feel, even in this moment, that it was something I was intuitive. I intuitively do, and I intuitively do well. And it was one of the first top moments in my career, in my life. I just was intrinsically happy doing something,
Hmm.
and I was good at it. So I say this in the context of someone who really felt there were moments where I felt I found my place in the universe. So in the context of that, my experience with workplace trauma was not knowing that I was being abused in the workplace, because all of the feedback, I took it as a gift. As someone once said, feedback is a gift. And the way I translated that is, when someone gives me feedback, there is therefore something wrong with me I have to fundamentally try to fix, no matter what that person is trying to say, whether it's quoted in racist rhetoric, whether it's point blank sexist and abusive work, whether it's a physical threat. There is always something I can do to make that person be better. And in essence, I had to take responsibility for the behavior of an abuser, because
Hmm.
on more than one occasion, multiple occasions with different employers, that was the feedback from teams like HR, that what more could I have done so the abuser would have not felt the need to be physically abusive, sexually abusive, um, and all other forms of abuse.
Right.
And so I internalized a lot of that and realized that, I could better, if I could better manage that, and some techniques would work, joking, a lot of humor, a lot of joking, a lot of being very demure. Those things worked, but I realize now they were maladaptive, and ultimately there wasn't any space for me to say that I'm afraid, that I'm afraid this person is going to hurt me. And I would say that there were a couple men I worked with when I worked as a consultant in Europe,
Hmm.
that I was afraid that they would physically hurt me. I was that afraid, that intimidated, that I was concerned they would physically attack me. And these are senior vice presidents, and that could be partly due to the fact I am only 5'1". So living in a land, a world of giants.
Hmm.
But there was never any space to talk about the fact that these people behaved in such a way that I actually was physically frightened, alongside all the other challenges that I just internalized. I just thought it was silly, stupid to feel physically intimidated. It's just a silly thing. Why should I feel that way? But I still was. So I feel that that it's just not realizing that that was what was going on with me, and not
Hmm.
and just assuming I was being childish, I was being stupid. Nobody else in the world feels that way. No one has ever been feels that way about their colleagues at work. Only I do, so I must be stupid. And even when raising it with peers, I'm told things like you're being dramatic. I remember once I was on the telephone with a colleague. I was working in Central Europe, and I was being harassed by the client and being harassed on the street by passers-by, and I started to cry on the phone. And the Englishman on the phone said to me, "Stop being dramatic." And so I kind of sucked it up. And I remember that. I remember him saying that to me. There was just no compassion. There was no space for that. And I felt ashamed because it was my fault. Yeah, how dare I cry? How dare I cry of the fact that I was being physically harassed on the street by strange men at night? How dare I? Isn't that just insane? And my
Very.
male colleague, you're being so dramatic. Stuff. The stuff, the stiff upper lip, I guess he must have had.
He gaslit you. Or wow. Who
Yeah,
are
it
you?
took 10 years. It took 10 years, Erykah, for me to realize I could have called the police. Like, now it's like, I just call the police and say, People have been harassing me on the street. Not that they would have done anything, but I could have called the police. I could have also refused to fly back out there and say, listen, I'm not going to go back out there. I could have, yeah, I just could have done that. I could have gone to the embassy, the British High Commissioner embassy in that country and saying I'm being threatened. But that took 10 years away from that for me to finally begin to think about what I could have done differently.
Mm-hmm.
But people knew I was in trouble because I did tell people, and their view was, that's just very strange, that's very bizarre. All the way to don't be dramatic.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean,
So it's
like,
very isolating.
I have no words, but go ahead.
It's very isolating. So when I just bringing it back to maybe thinking about the form we have here together,
Mhm.
Erykah, I do think what I take away from that for me is it's very isolating. And I do think it's important when people are going through that to have safe spaces to talk to about what's going on where they can be constructive and supportive. I did not have that. Even with some of my friends, well meaning, but I didn't have a single friend who was able to say, Jimmy, you should call the police. Or I'm gonna call the police. Or you need to do more than just, you know, you don't have to go. How can I support you through this? What can I do to help you make that decision? I didn't have those people. And I recognize people, everybody means well, but I
Mhm.
don't think anybody really understood how bad it was. Um, and I realized that it wasn't because I wasn't telling them it was bad. There was this viewpoint with a lot of my own network that you just have to be tough, and it's not that big a deal, and you just get past it, and it's always another project. Nobody actually believed that I was in trouble. That, and I think that's the issue about workplace trauma, especially for Black women, is that when we talk about it, I think a lot of people who care about us, our siblings, our family members, our friends, do not believe that we are actually in danger.
Right. Yeah.
And I feel like we need to recognize that we do need rescuing.
Hmm.
We really do. I remember a friend of mine had a mental health crisis. She's younger. She's like 20 something years younger than I am. And and this is before I started working on the film, but while I was on my own um, um, mental health, going through my own issues,
Hmm.
and she had such a severe crisis that I sat with her to call her employer to explain why she couldn't go back to work. And she asked me, "Can I speak to her employer?" I'm not an employee of the company, and I did. I said, "I'm with her right now. This is what's happened to her. This is what's been going on, and she's not ready to go back to work. So she wanted me to talk to you about this before I put her on the phone." And it was important, I knew the value of having someone there because I never had somebody there for me
Hmm.
when I needed someone to be there, even after I had asked, because I just really wasn't believed for this. So what I hope, so that does compound things with workplace trauma. If you don't have a safe space to go where you'll be supported, where you'll be held, where you'll be believed, and the help will come from a place of belief, not from a place of inquiry or interrogation.
Yeah. Thank you for like sharing, your story with me with workplace with this, because I honestly think this needs to be talked about a little bit more. Because the thing is, HR or the person above you, especially when you talk about, workplace trauma, workplace bullying, it's almost like they can do something about it, but they just don't want to, right? And it's like you have that lack of support, right? And I think companies, need to do better with addressing, this kind of stuff, right? Addressing, what goes on in the trauma that goes on in workplace. Burnout is another thing which I could talk about and go on and on about too. um but I think, workplace trauma especially, isn't talked about enough. And, you know, I think also it comes with there's lack of resources available.
I I I agree, and I also want to say that, to in all fairness to human resources, I really, how do I say this? A lot of people. I'll give an example. One of the functions that a couple functions that sit in HR
Mm-hmm.
are pensions, right? How you get connected to a pension provider. Some of the pension coordination, maybe not. They're not pension providers, but they do a lot of pension coordination work. They also do a lot of payroll work. And I'm definitely, I mean, this is a oversimplification of what HR does,
Mm-hmm.
but those are core functions in many HR functions. I don't really think we should be putting people's mental health in the hands of payroll specialists.
Right.
HR's job is not to be mental health specialists or experts.
Mm-hmm.
That is not their function. And a well-meaning, and I'll give an example about how even well-meaning HR involvement, which is often what we see that kind of backfires, is where we're seeing someone who is a learning and development expert, or a learning and development expert, or a pension coordinator, or a HR business partner, which deals with disciplinaries and how you rank and rate and promote people, and compensation specialists, recruitment expert. We see all these kinds of people. Again, not these are important skill sets,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel it backfires when they come into the space where they're not trained for. Um, we know that. And I'll give an example. A lot of people
Mm-hmm.
in the world are under severe severe antipsychotics,
Mm-hmm.
antipsychotic medication. They're very, 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 um, for various reasons. We also know there are people who are currently taking electroshock therapy. Now, I don't personally know anybody who's who's taking a severe antipsychotic medication, or anybody who's undergoing electroshock therapy. But that doesn't mean I haven't met people who are. But that's something that mental health experts are involved in,
Mm-hmm.
not payroll specialists,
Right.
right? And so some of people under a wide range of mental health support are
Mm-hmm.
in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, some are taking electroshock therapy, some are doing talk therapy, some are doing um, Valium, some people are doing more dietary. There's a whole range of people who are getting mental health support, and even those who should that aren't, and
Mm-hmm.
everything that sits in between that. If there's anything in between that,
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it's fair to put that onto a human resources department,
Right.
because getting a degree in a business degree, which is what HR sits under,
Mm-hmm.
I don't see how that equips them to begin talking and helping people who are being traumatized at work.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't social workers or psychologists or sociologists or doctors who are coming into. They're not. It's not as if companies are recruiting. Well, some might be, but often they're not recruiting social workers, psychologists, therapists,
Therapists. Mm-hmm.
psychiatrists into those roles in their companies to do that function. They're
Mm-hmm.
hiring people who were payroll specialists, pension specialists, the compensation experts, recruitment people. And I feel that's where we end up. I think a big reason it gets messed up so badly
Mm-hmm.
is that really it wasn't really fair to put that on them in the first place. I won't even lie to you. I would be impressed if a company's brought in hostage negotiators to sit in that space, because I think you get a better result,
Hmm.
because these are people who know how to work with people to get, mutually uh, um, to get, hopefully beneficial results for at least some one party without the other party feeling that they've been taken advantage of. But so I think that's a big part of that.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think that it's believed by default. So you're going into a situation of bullying, where there's an assumption of neutrality. They may not always be there. And this is not to say that every HR department has that. Because I'm pretty sure there's some that hire therapists, that hire
Right.
social workers, that
Hmm.
hire those kinds of people. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some that have hired hostage negotiators as HR staff, not as contractors that come in and have
Right.
actually staffed HR with those kind of skill sets.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that's not being done, but the vast majority don't do that. And so I do think that they're not equipped to handle these conversations. And so going into a space where you don't believe it's possible, or you believe someone's overreacting, or you believe, let's just see let's hear both sides of the issue, knowing that the boss who's being complained about, there's a lot of issues with him already. um, or presenting oneself as a neutral arbiter when you're not, and not actually disclosing the bias that you have
Right.
in a way
Hmm.
that a licensed therapist and a licensed psychiatrist must disclose bias. So it's not necessarily going to create a healthy place for
Right.
people to unpack, because they don't trust. Once that trust has been violated, and not by this HR department, but maybe three HR departments in three jobs ago,
Hmm.
understanding that you can't just say, let's draw a straight line, let's just draw a line under that and we'll start again, fresh, and just trust us. That's something that, again, that's not how the mind works. And
Hmm.
having people who are not trained in mental health, not, and I'm not saying mental health first aiders. That's,
Right.
you don't go to a physical first aider when someone's having a heart attack, or has had their hand chopped off. You don't go to a first aider for that. So we're not talking about mental health first aiders
Right.
at all. So people who have not really invested the time and the experience, the hours, the clinical hours in this space, you know, I can see someone from HR, someone from even a manager saying, let's just draw a line, forget about the past, let's start again. I don't
Right.
see a therapist saying that in
Hmm.
the same context, because they could lose their license if they keep
Hmm.
pushing down a certain line.
Right.
And recognizing that it's just very different. So I want to say this in a sense that I don't want people to, I think people should have some compassion for their HR teams,
Yes.
often trying to do the best they can
Hmm.
for a job that I think a lot of them just, they didn't go to 10 years of school to learn how to do it. They went to 10 years, they did 4 years in college and maybe 2 years as a master's to do payroll work or HR general work, not psychiatry, not psychology, not therapy.
Yeah. And I agree. Like, you know, I don't think, like you were saying, like HR personnel should handle that. And I agree with what you're saying. And but I think, you know, you you have to you I think workers need like mental health professionals, you know, somebody that they can talk to, some, you know, that's not HR, somebody trained. And like you were saying, like it starts with empathy. It starts with having compassion for your workers. And I feel like, you know, and I mean like I work in the healthcare field, but I do registration. So I work in the ER. And what I've been seeing is like, you know, especially working understaffed, right? You're constantly burnt out. And what's, you know, what I've learned working in the hospital has been that there are lack of resources as far as like mental health professionals, you know. When let's say let's say I'll give like a coworker, I'll give this example, like a coworker of mine, um was really going through it, and however, they they don't have like somebody on site to talk to, like I think there needs to be a mental health professional like in the workplace to give them that kind of support. um and I just find that, if you know what I'm saying, so I just find that like there's there's not enough resources, like mental health professionals, like in the workplace. And we're going to HR, which I mean HR, you know to me, I just find that they don't really care about your mental health, um and they're not trained for that. So like I think what all workplaces need to adopt is some kind of mental health professional, that will support each and every one of the staff, if you know what I'm saying, like especially in a workplace, somebody that you can talk to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think what I think it's important. When I think about when companies setting up their structures, the bigger question I would even, and why I made the film,
Hmm.
is to help leadership ask themselves the question about what kind of environment are we creating?
Hmm.
Because if we're creating an environment where people are burning out, we what do we need to change that environment so people don't burn out? And as much as I am saying, to have compassion with HR, for leadership, especially senior leadership, I do think you also need to have compassion for leaders. Um, but the more senior you get, it's a little bit of a problem of their own design,
Hmm.
because leaders get to choose, decide where budget goes,
Right.
and they often will choose not to invest in themselves in these areas. Because leaders, I also think leadership, they need to be trauma informed,
Hmm.
and they need to understand really what the cost is of burning out their staff. So right now we're seeing it,
Hmm.
especially in healthcare, where
Yeah.
people are leaving and not coming back.
Hmm.
And so now what has been said to leaders for years,
Hmm.
you can't keep on treating people like this without a consequence. They're now seeing the consequence. And I think a lot of leaders are still struggling to maneuver from how they lead, because the only way they know how to manage is management through pressure,
Hmm.
which causes burnout. And then people are leaving, and then people don't want to come back. And they're telling everybody, like everyone's being told, you don't want to work in that sector. That's a harder piece, because without leadership, that leadership shift, we're not going to get out of that quagmire. It's the leaders that will decide how, with the budgets they have, with the budgets they don't have, how do we provide more mental health and wellness resources to our colleagues, our colleagues, even to ourselves. And a
Hmm.
lot of leadership teams don't even provide that to themselves.
Hmm.
They just choose. So they don't, if I don't think mental health support is even worthy for me, I'm sure as heck not gonna think it's worthy for you.
Hmm.
Um, so, and I do find a lot of leaders, especially when it comes to questions around race and gender.
Hmm.
Um, there is very I've seen very little evidence of companies providing leaders safe spaces for their own mental health to wrestle with this, because we need them to be resilient mentally to now take this issue to their middle managers, and they just don't do it. And I think a big reason leaders don't do it is because they're frightened.
Hmm.
They're frightened of what that will do to them emotionally. They hide behind the financial issues, but I suspect a lot of it is because they're frightened. And I use the word frightened on purpose.
Right.
Um, and I do think it is right. And I think that, but that's a sign of, that dis-ease, that discomfort, there is no space for them to kind of do that work. So they can, you know, push it aside, say, they're going to work on leadership issues. But now you're having, and they're pushing aside that, no, the treatment of our staff isn't linked to our high vacancy rates. No, that those aren't related. They're not. Staff not wanting to work here and how we treat staff aren't the same. There's no correlation. There's no link.
Right.
And we'll quit. So yeah, I mean, you know, there are people I know who, once they hear anybody wants to work at a company they work for, they will call that person and tell them why they shouldn't work there, even if they don't know that person, know that person personally. So how people are treated will go a long way.
Hmm.
So I do think that piece is a harder piece, Erykah, because it's we need them to be mentally, how do they say, strong. Yeah, mentally strong.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
that means stepping into the danger, doing the courageous thing, making mistakes, and
Hmm.
pushing things forward. And it's hard to do that without, if they're scared themselves, they're frightened as well. The best thing, frightened, you can just wrap it up in subterfuge of different things and buy some rainbow lanyards and say, inclusion for all.
Hmm.
And that's it. Buy like a big cake or every kind of flag in the world on that cake, and move on and say you've done it and we're now going on to work on leadership stuff. That's more important. But what we're hiding is, no, I'm scared and I don't want to admit I'm scared. So I want to say that I have more important things to do. Like the little 6-year-old kid who puts on her mother's suit and is now bossy. I'm mommy and I'm going to do whatever because I'm mommy now. It's like, it's cute.
Hmm.
It would be cute if not for the fact that so many people are suffering because the work cultures they're forced to work in. They're forced to work in, but fight or flight applies to executives as well. The fight or flight response, and so what we see is that flight
Yeah.
response.
Response. Yeah, absolutely. So you have a documentary and it's called Arise Firebird. So, can you tell my audience just a little bit about your documentary?
Sure, Erica. Arise Firebird celebrates the resilience of women and BIPOC professionals in the workplace. It tells the stories of 3 seasoned Black and Brown women who worked in and around London, how what how they experience their workplace, specifically toxic work, harassment, bullying, sexism, racism, ultimately lead to disillusionment and disengagement and departure. The film explores the impact of this work environment on their mental health, on their family, on their well-being, and their physical health, and how they are now rebuilding their lives and their careers on their own terms.
That's amazing. I love it. I love that. Um, I want to watch it. I really do. Um, yeah, so thank you for sharing that. I really would like to watch it. So now is your film so your film um is it gonna be like in the US and UK and other countries?
So primarily, we're targeting the U.S. and Canada right now because we are a
Okay.
small team.
Hmm.
Our big goal is to get it onto PBS next year during
Hmm.
Women's History Month. So we're really trying to raise awareness and raise funds for that to actually happen. We also do film festivals. The film is currently in doing the festival tour,
Hmm.
so it may be in a film festival near you. And we are also doing private screenings of the film in non-profits like Association for Women in Science, the National Association of Women in Construction, and with companies as well. So companies can ask us to come in and we can show what we've done and have a workshop or a discussion with teams
Hmm.
around the themes that we've discussed here, Erykah, and other issues around really well-being and happiness in the workplace. The hope is to get people to stay in careers they love
Hmm.
and not be pushed to the point of breaking.
Right. Right.
So if
I
anybody
love.
is interested sorry,
No, 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 go ahead.
if anyone is interested, if anyone is interested, if any of your viewers, listeners or viewers really do want to bring the film into their organizations, I really would. They can definitely get in touch.
Yeah. I love that. So, yeah, if anyone, is interested, reach out to Jimmy, for those who are listening. So Jimmy, I have one last question for you. So, this is about self-care. So self-care is the most talked about topic. You hear it all over the news, social media, the newspapers. So I want to know, like, in your own words, like, how do you define self-care and what self-care activities do you incorporate in your everyday life?
So one that I'm really working on, in incorporating more or sitting with, is forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Forgiveness, and it's in the view of self care, Erica. The space of just really being at peace
Mm-hmm.
with what has happened in the past, for good or for bad. Um, Forgiveness for myself and forgiveness for others, regardless of their motive or their intention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to take some of that tension out of me, to take some of that tension out of me. Another big thing, very tactically, is I do like bubble baths. Um, it is my my it's my favorite thing. I don't do much. I'm pretty much a homebody, just working on the film. Um, but my big treat for myself is a bubble bath, not particularly pricey.
Right.
Just being able to sit in a hot bath at the end of the day or the beginning of the day and meditate and pray and sing or watch TV and just be present. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's been helpful to me. So I look for things like that in terms of helping me wind down, helping me slow down. Um, it's important that my self care isn't tied to money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one, I'm running I have a startup business, so there's that. But also, it's important that it's something I feel I can do no matter where I am and no matter what state I'm in. I'm able to do that. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I agree. Like, for me, self-care kind of looks different depending on the day. I always what I look for in self-care is what what gives Erica joy today? What do I love to do? And I mean, one of the things, and like what activities that does brings Erica that kind of joy. One of them for me, um, anyway, I do love to go on my walks in the mornings, especially. I love to spend time in nature. So that's something that I always make sure that when I get up, I have to make sure that I go on my walks. um, and another thing for me is just I like taking a nice shower and putting on like a shower meditation on YouTube. They have those little shower meditations, and they'll give like words of affirmations and stuff like that. So I love to listen to that, especially when I'm showering. I love it because it's like, okay, so I'm having all these affirmations poured down on me. Like that gives me, oh, okay, I'm starting my day on a positive note already. So, and another thing I love to do, I love to journal even on my hard days. So, like, I like to write down three things I'm grateful for, three amazing things that happened today. And if I am feeling down, like I always ask myself, okay, what's making me feel this way today? Like, what are some things that happened that, you know, made me feel a certain way? And I use it to reflect. And then, I love to do yoga. I'm a yoga girl. um, yeah, and I just love like any form of exercise. So I always that's how I take care of like my it helps with not only my physical health but also my mental health to release whatever tension I have, especially if I'm anxious. Um so And another thing, like, this is something my therapist taught me. So, three things that you see, three things you hear, and three things that you can feel. And that helps with bringing myself back into the present moment. So I love doing
Yeah.
that. So thank you, Jimmy, for coming on the show.
Thank you for
Want to,
having me.
yeah, I enjoyed our conversation. So just let everyone know where they can find you on social media, your website, your film.
Sure. So hashtag Arise Firebird, I think on all the platforms where we are, and we're not on all of them, but some of them.
Hmm.
LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. But mainly you'll find me hanging around LinkedIn.
Hmm.
And if you want to learn more, arisefirebird.com. If you'd like to inquire about bringing our film into your organization, arisefirebird.com. And if you also are curious about donating to help us with our PBS broadcast, arisefirebird.com.
All right, you guys. So that is it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you, Jimmy, again for joining me. And for those listening, if you are not following me on the podcast Instagram page, it is at the Take 30 Podcast. So I'm also on Facebook. You can just search the Take 30 Podcast. I'm on this social media site called threads.net, which is the new Twitter page. It's simply the Take 30 podcast. Um, and I'm also on YouTube. You can subscribe to the Take 30 YouTube channel and all of my social media, all of Jimmy's social all of Jimmy's handles will be linked in the bio below. So I hope you guys have a lovely day. Make sure to always spread kindness, whatever that looks like, and also make sure to take care of your mental health because you come first. So I have to always put that out there. So for those listening, make sure to take time for your mental health in any way that looks like, because again, you matter. So I hope you guys have a lovely day, and I will talk to you guys in the next episode. Bye, guys.